So what I've seen in my research is that retail and lots of other industries are set up in a way that does not meet the basic needs of the workers. But the thing is, and the conventional wisdom is that these bad jobs are inevitable. That if you want high profits, if you want low prices, these bad jobs are inevitable. And that is just absolutely not true. And one of the things that you might have seen in my title is that I'm in the operations management group. Right? How many of you associate operations management with jobs or workers and meaning and dignity? Not so much, probably. Right? It's you studied inventory, you studied process analysis, you studied capacity management, you might have studied quality, flexibility, supply chain, all those things, but not so much jobs. Right? But I came to study this problem because I saw how expensive bad jobs were to companies. And that was my starting point. And I'll give you examples. So when I was a young doctoral student, I joined a group of researchers from Harvard Business School and Wharton. And we were all studying retail supply chains. And here was our premise. Retailers have a lot of data. They have a lot of point of sales data. They have a lot of inventory data. We have smart algorithms in forecasting demand, in assortment optimization, in inventory management, you name it, price optimization. So we have these algorithms. They have the data. If we apply these algorithms to their wonderful data, we will help them make better decisions and help them make more money. Right? And our whole research was about getting the right product to the right store at the right time. We had over 30 retailers in our study. And every year, we held a conference with a bunch of executives. During one of the conferences in one year, the CEO of Office Depot raised his hand. And he said, you academics are really obsessed with data and analysis. And that's great. But guess what? Oftentimes, my supply chain gets the right product to the right store. But then the product never meets the customer because it's in the wrong place. Because the employees put it in the wrong place. Or they forgot to just bring it from the back room to the selling floor. We said, really? And he called this a phantom stockout. And then we asked around, how many of you think that you have this problem? And everybody raised their hand. So as a doctoral student at the time, I thought this was not a very interesting problem to study. But then the interest got me interested. And I studied this at Borders Group. Remember Borders? So they were my dissertation site. And they're not with us anymore. They didn't go bankrupt because they did research with me. I just want to say that for other reasons, Amazon being one of the major reasons. But at Borders, we found this to be a huge problem. And we realized this wasn't a problem just in Borders. Right? If we were running a classroom here, I would ask you how many of you have experienced a phantom stockout, and most of you would raise your hands, and you would give us experiences where you experienced it. In CPG retail, almost a third, a quarter to a third of all, I say this a third. I was raised in Harvard, so, quarter. They're phantom stockouts, so the supply chain gets the product. It's in the store, but in the wrong location. At another specialty retailer, we found that 60% of the stockouts were actually phantom stockouts, so the product was there in the wrong place. And then we realized this is not the only execution problem that happens inside retail stores. So we thought retailers had great data. And then we realized, once we started collecting data, that most of those data were actually inaccurate data. I don't know how many of you have data inaccuracy issues in your own organizations, and I'm sure none of you do. But let me give you data from a large retailer. They're still around, by the way, unlike Borders. So what I'm showing here is the data accuracy from over 300,000 SKUs, stock keeping units, which is distinct products. And the absolute error here is a discrepancy between what their inventory system said that they had in stock versus what they actually had in stock. So for 35% of the SKUs, the system matched physical. So the data were accurate. For 65% of the SKUs, the data were inaccurate. And one of my favorite reactions to this chart, I've given this example 100 times before, but it comes from a large retailer. And the SVP of supply chains, this is a large supermarket chain, he said, how did they get the 35% right? And he said, every year we sell 25% more medium red tomatoes than we ever received to our stores. How can that be? How can they be selling 25% more medium red tomatoes than they ever received to their stores? How is that possible? What's that?
Say the cashier punches in the wrong code?
Exactly. You go to a supermarket, there are 20 different types of tomatoes. Campari, beefsteak, cherry, lots of different tomatoes. So for a cashier who has been there for 3 weeks, any tomato looks like a medium red tomato. And they just put in there. So the reason this company had 35% accuracy was because everything was automatic scanning. But what I found in my research is that all of these operational problems led to lower sales and profits, not just now, but in the future, because with bad data, especially if you use centralized merchandising system, you affect decisions for the future. And then, of course, the obvious question was, why do these problems happen all the time? Right? So my interest from retail supply chains is actually what got me started in this jobs problem. Because when I started looking at a bunch of data, I saw that stores that had more employee turnover had more problems. Stores that had less training had more problems. Stores that didn't have enough people, like not enough warm bodies to be able to get all the work done, had more problems. And in fact, retailers were operating in what I call a vicious cycle. So the vicious cycle starts with this mentality, and this is not just in retail, this is apparent in lots of other industries. The vicious cycle starts with the mentality that people are just a cost, right? And because this is a very low margin industry, cost minimization is extremely important, right? When your margins are in single digits. So that mentality encourages store managers to operate, to focus so much on reducing their payroll costs. And oftentimes, the whole performance management systems are created around minimizing payroll costs as a percentage of sales. You have very limited impact on sales. Weather can affect sales. Lots of other things affect sales. You don't, but you can control your payroll. So whenever sales decline, you just reduce the payroll along with that. And this underinvestment, both in the quantity of people and the quality of people. And by quality, I mean pay, training, etc. That leads to operational problems. Operational problems lead to lower sales. When sales are lower, what happens to labor budgets? They shrink, right? So this vicious cycle continues. And one of the things that since my book came out, I've been working with a lot more retailers. And one of the things is that it's not just these apparent operational problems that hurts companies. In companies that operate in this vicious cycle, the instability just kills them. Instability creates an environment of chaos, and it just provides an environment where you can't do the most basic things that you would think that you would do. Let me give you one example. So this comes from a retailer that we worked with last year. They have over 1,000 stores. Employee turnover is 120% on average. Some stores do better than others. And what I'm showing here is 3 weeks and who worked during those 3 weeks. And whether the person that worked during those 3 weeks, whether they worked more than the scheduled hours or fewer than scheduled hours. Okay? So in a normal world, you will think that if you're scheduled for 30 hours, you will work for 30 hours. Right? So when you look at the employees in this organization, what you see is that there are so few people who work their scheduled hours. Many of them work fewer hours than scheduled, maybe because they didn't show up, or they showed up late, or they were told not to come because because of payroll cost cutting. And then some of them work more than scheduled hours. Now imagine being the manager of this store. What is it like to manage this store? Are you spending your time coaching, developing, mentoring your people? Or are you just spending your time firefighting and figuring out who is going to do what, who is going to show up, who is not going to show up? This instability is so expensive. Sarah, when she worked at this large retailer, and this is a huge retailer, she had unpredictable schedules that changed all the time. One day, she was asked to work 9 hours on a Saturday where she didn't want to work because it was her godchild's birthday. She was there for 9 hours, but she was only given work for an hour and a half. for 7.5 hours, she had nothing to do. And she's working at this company to do a good job, right? Why? Because the managers just cannot keep track of who is working and who is doing what because of all this instability. So there are lots of costs associated with this. And I'll give you one more example from a retailer. What we found was that if you reduce that instability, it makes a big difference. So we analyzed data from more than 59,000 workers of the same retailer that I showed you the data before. And this retailer tracks sales productivity of each of their workers. So what we said was, what happens, and we looked at 52 weeks of data, so large data set, 52 weeks of data, more than 59,000 people, and what we found was that, and we controlled for lots of things. We did a fixed effect for the stores, for the week, lots of controls. The average sales per hour for an associate was $81 an hour. If you added 6 months of tenure to that associate, that went up by $6. If you increase their hours, instead of having so many people, but each person getting so few hours and having this instability, if you work with fewer workers, but each worker has more hours so they can have some stability and they can learn the job and they can get to know the job so much better, leads to $16 an hour in sales productivity. And if you reduce the variability in their scheduling, it has another $7 impact. So this is very preliminary analysis. So these data, before we publish this, these numbers are probably going to change a little bit, plus or minus. But you see the impact of providing more stability for sales productivity. And then, of course, you change the position and you look at the customers, what customers of these companies say, right? And these are just a couple of Yelp quotes from customers that shop at large retail chains. The staff is absolute worst, and they never have anything in stock. If they do, check days, high chance it's expired. If I could give this company 0 stars, I would. Disorganized and just plain filthy. Every time I have gone, I waited in line for 20 to 30 minutes. Waste of time. Employees do not care and are disrespectful. Avoid this store. Now, we talked about the human needs, right, from the worker's point of view. If you think about customer needs, what we want is, in great organizations, establish emotional connections with the customer so that they are fans of your organization, right? They identify with your brand, they feel ownership, and they feel like they're being taken care of. Everybody treats them with respect. But in these companies, their basic needs are not met either because of poor execution and bad operations. So mediocrity, and I call this mediocrity, right? This system that we have, mediocrity is bad for investors because they leave a lot of money on the table. It's bad for customers because they receive bad service, and it's just downright brutal on employees. And the case that I will make is that if you want to have a more sustainable society and a more sustainable economy, we need to have a revolution in low-wage services. Right? We need to revolutionize these industries, and that's very possible. We've seen this before. We've seen this before in the auto industry. Right? That industry, if you look 100 years ago, Henry Ford's assembly line, people felt just like how our retail workers or fast food workers are feeling right now. Interchangeable parts, no training, no dignity, right? The job designed in a way that anyone could do it. Most people in the assembly line didn't even speak English. Henry Ford was so famous saying, why is it that I need to hire a whole person when all I need is a pair of hands, right? But then, several decades later, Toyota came in, and Toyota showed the world that actually, if you create an operating system that manages people and operations differently, the result is not just higher quality cars, but also lower cost cars. So we've seen this revolution happening in the auto industry before. And the reason what gets me out from bed every morning, and I hope that that's what gets Sarah out of bed every morning, is to create the same type of revolution in low-wage service industries. We so need that for the dignity of millions of people and for our economy and our society. And if you're not happy with the political situation right now, be a part of making this change. And I'm going to show you how to make it now. So as I looked at these retailers that operated in this vicious cycle, and I kept thinking, there has to be someone operating differently. I met Maradona. I was writing a case because of my interest in supply chains. I was writing a case about Zara. I was in La Coruña meeting with Zara's executives. When I was there, they told me about this company that they admired. They said it's called Maradona, low-cost supermarket chain. I was intrigued, came back here, studied them, and then went back to Spain and studied them more and fascinated with them. Anyone here has been to Maradona? Are you Spanish? OK, cool. So this is low-cost. You want to say anything about Maradona?
We love it.
You love it? But that's it?
Other markets that have innovative brands do not think that well about it, but as customers, it's very popular and we like it.
Yeah, for customers, it's very popular. They've grown quite a bit, more than 20 billion euros in sales. They are profitable, as you see in this chart. And if you compare their financial performance to their competitors, for that you can look at my case, and you will see that they are outliers in the industry in terms of performance. Customers are happy, low prices, good service. And Maradona offers much better jobs than typical retail jobs. So if you start at Maradona, you get about double the minimum wage in Spain, which is incredibly low. So that's one thing. But 85% of the store employees are full-timers who receive their schedules 1 month in advance. And they work in shifts, in predictable shifts. Maradona spends 5,000 euros per new worker in training, 4 weeks of training, 5,000 euros. If you start as a cashier or fruit and vegetable specialist, that's what you get. And their employee turnover, the year when I went to visit them, they said it was 3.8%. And then I thought, I didn't believe the Spanish people. So I said, maybe they have a different way of calculating employee turnover. I'm like, how exactly are you calculating it? But when I met people working at the stores, they've been there for 15 years, for 20 years. Like, people stay there for a long, long time. So this was my first example of a company that operated very differently than the other companies that I showed you before. Right? The second example, anyone has been to a Kwik Trip? Kwik Trip? Who? What is it like?
I'm not sure, because I get a moment.
OK, so it's a convenience store chain. It's like 7-Eleven. You've been there?
Yeah, I've been there because I live in Atlanta. So it's a convenience store and a gas station. But you go to the convenience store, it's fairly expansive. It's very clean. The restaurants are very clean. The staff is a little cheerier. So sometimes I just go there to buy a little bit of convenience store.
It's a convenience store. It's always, right? I mean, it's a convenience chain, right? They don't put a red carpet. But it's always clean. Merchandise is where it's supposed to be. People are friendly. And when I ask this question, this is the response that I get from the audience. Sometimes I get weirder responses. Like last semester, when I was teaching this class, the CEO joined us, and I said, anyone has been to Kwik Trip? And one of my students said, my father-in-law is obsessed with Kwik Trip. And I get these weird responses once in a while. But customers are very happy about it. They have low gas prices, great merchandise. And their per-store profits, 89% higher than the top quartile in the industry, not the average, top quartile in the industry. Their labor productivity, much higher than the top quartile in the industry. Their shrink is less than half the industry average. And they pay their employees about double the retail wages. So they pay very well. If you're a store manager at Kwik Trip, you manage about 10 to 12 people, you make $70,000, around $70,000. Not bad at all compared to others. If you start as a full-timer, what was it? $38,000 or $35,000 if you start as a full-timer. As starting wage, right? Starting wage and your, with your bonus. So another example of a company that has found a way to offer good jobs to their employees, again, very low employee turnover, just like in Maradona, and great service and low prices to their customers, and great returns to their shareholders. So of course, the obvious, and there's always the Costco example, right? Costco is one of our favorite examples, but everybody uses it, so I'm not gonna go through that. And Trader Joe's, one more. So the question is, what's their secret? How are they able to do this, right? How are they able to create value, offer good jobs to their employees, create value to their customers, and great value to their shareholders? Win, win, win at the same time. And I wish this was the answer. I wish that my economist friends talk about efficiency wages, and they say, if you pay people more, then you attract better people, and they want to stay with you longer. And as a result, performance is so much higher. I wish this was the answer, that I could say, just if you are operating in this vicious cycle, if you're not happy where you are, just increase the wages or be nicer to people, and the world will be a much nicer place. But the answer is not as easy as this. That's what I found in my research. It's a lot more complicated. These companies like Costco and Maradona, Kwik Trip, they have designed a completely different operating system than their competitors have designed. And those of you, if you took operations when you were here, and if you did a case about Toyota, I don't know if I can cold call anyone. I know some people here. But you might see some similarities between the operating system that these companies have and Toyota has. So in particular, what they have made is, they have made a set of operating decisions that increase the productivity and contribution of their workers. Now, if you can create a system where employees are amazingly productive and they can contribute a lot, now you can pay them more, right? So paying more is a result of this operations strategy, not necessarily a human strategy, but the operations strategy that the companies make. But of course, if you create a system for high productivity and high contribution, what you need is capable and motivated people. And as a result of that, these companies invest in their people, and of course, these choices leverage the investment in people. And I'll give you just a short summary of the types of choices that I've observed in these companies. And in the book, each of these choices is a chapter. So there's a lot more here than I'm going to talk about right now. So when I analyze these companies, and when I've looked at lots of other companies in service industries, outside the service industries, these tend to be the types of choices that they make, specific choices that they make, that enable them to increase the productivity, contribution of their workers, and also create great value for their investors and great value to their customers. The first choice is offer less. That oftentimes, people think that being customer-focused is giving all customers everything that they want. These companies, from a strategic perspective, they are very aware of what it is that they offer their customers and what they give up. Think about Southwest Airlines. Right? Think about their laser focus, at least in their first 40 years, of what they give their customers and what they give up. So the first dimension of operation, offer less, is strategic, the strategic focus. The second dimension of offer less is operational simplification. One of the things I observed in a lot of industries is that if you don't pay attention, operational complexity just takes over. Right? One of the, in retail, for example, you compare the number of products a typical supermarket had in 1940s versus the number of products now, unbelievable. Right? There used to be 4,000 products per store, now 40,000 different products. You go to a typical supermarket, you can find 150 different types of toothpaste. 150 different types of toothpaste. Right? They come in different brands, different all sorts of things, right? So these companies do simplify operationally. And of course, if you simplify, then your workers are a lot more productive. And they can do their tasks much simpler. I'll give you the Maradona example, right? If you go to a typical supermarket, you'll see 40,000 products. If you go to Maradona, you will see 8,000 products. 8,000 products, but you will find everything that you need to complete your shopping. And what you will see is if you go for fruit and vegetables, there will be a specialist in that area, and that person will know almost everything about every product. So if you offer less, if you simplify, Now people can actually be competent in what they do. They can be knowledgeable about the products that they sell, and they can shine in front of the customers rather than fail in front of the customers. And of course, because you've invested in people, they can substitute for product variety. Right? So you see the play between investment in people and operational simplification. So the second choice that I've observed among these companies is, oftentimes people talk about, should we standardize processes or should we empower people? Right? It's like dichotomy between standardization and empowerment. But the best companies, operational excellence companies, they standardize and empower. Right? You look at Four Seasons, you look at Toyota, you look at Maradona, you look at Trader Joe's, you look at Kwik Trip, you will see a lot of standardization because standardization is the basis for improvement. Right? You don't want to invent the wheel all the time and have people use their mental capacity for doing things that should be very simple, routine, and do it in the most efficient way. But at the same time that they standardize, they empower their people to improve those standards. And they empower their people to make decisions for their customers. So let's take Maradona's example, fruit and vegetable specialist. That person will order merchandise. They decide how many kilos of tomatoes the store will have 2 days from now. Now, they have great data. They have great analytics to help them make that decision. And if they want, they can just say, oh, the ordering quantity, this is what the recommended order quantity is. We'll just take that. Or they might say, there's a soccer event or football event, they will call it, outside. So we know we will have a lot more traffic, so I'm going to order more of this and less of that. So they leverage the local knowledge. And again, they contribute more to the company's success. And as a result, Maradona can pay them more. And the third choice that I observed among these companies, they cross-train their employees so that they perform both customer-facing tasks and non-customer-facing tasks. And if you cross-train to do those, then you don't have to change the number of people as the customer traffic changes throughout the day. Taking the Maradona example, if you go there and you're a fruit and vegetable specialist and you see a long line of customers at the checkout, you just go and open another cash register. Right? That flexibility enables you to offer a much better service, to be a lot more responsive. That flexibility makes the employee feel much better about their jobs because they can make a bigger difference. And that flexibility is great for the company because everybody is productive, whether you have customers at the stores or not. So cross-train, of course, you need to balance flexibility and specialization and motivation. There's a lot more nuance that goes into training than what I'm talking about here. But this is the third choice. The fourth choice, you go to a typical store, you probably won't see a lot of people. You go to a Maradona or a Trader Joe's, you will actually see people. You'll see employees who are there to help you. Why? Because these companies, they forecast what the workload is going to be, and they staff their stores with a little bit more than the expected workload. This is like those of you who took inventory management, who did the news vendor, they apply the same theory to staffing, which makes so much sense. And with that extra slack, everybody has enough time to be able to take care of the customers, to be able to do their jobs. And of course, with extra slack, now you can also involve in improvement. So these are the 4 choices that these companies make. And these choices all create, when we talk about the human needs, these 4 choices have a way of affecting human needs, right? If you offer fewer products or operational simplification, now you can pay people more because they are a lot more productive. Now they feel that they're successful in front of the customers, so they feel more pride in their work. So you can map each of those 4 choices into how they add value to the employees, and they also add value to the customers and to the investors as well. And these 4 choices together drive continuous improvement. One of the things about these companies is if you look at them 5 years ago and you look at them now, you'll see a lot of differences because every day they improve. But these 4 choices only work with great people. Right? You can't operate with slack if you have slackers. Right? So it comes with high expectations, high accountability, high performance, and very capable and motivated people. And that's why these companies invest in their people. And by investing in people, I'm not just saying hiring the right people, training them well. I'm also saying performance management, high accountability. The worst thing that could happen in these organizations if somebody is a slacker because they bring everybody down. Right? So these are high accountability settings. And the other thing is, as I looked across these companies, I saw that their value statements differed from company to company, but they all had 3 things in common. First is they are obsessed with the customer. Like everything in these organizations is customer first. Every process is designed with customer first. Everything that they do, end-to-end processes focus on the customer and what it is that you offer customer and being very clear about what you don't offer. The second value is their employees are not interchangeable parts. Their employees are not a cost to be minimized. Their employees are actually seen as a resource who can drive growth, who can drive profit. And then the third common value among these companies is continuous improvement. They're never satisfied where they are. They always want to get better, and they always want to improve. And this is, we've seen this MIT. I'm not the only MIT Sloan person who talks about this, right? This is like we've had decades of research that came from this institution that showed similar things. And one of the things that I just want to walk through these slides really fast. One of the things that I'm working on now, my research agenda, is to spread this good job strategy. Because there are so few companies that operate this way, and there are too many companies that still see their workers as interchangeable parts. This is not just good for the economy, it's good for the companies, it's good for them now, and it's good for them in the future, because when you look at the companies, the strategic benefits of operating this way is twofold. First of all, you can differentiate yourself from your competitors. Right? If you follow the good job strategy, if you create operational excellence in your environment, you can differentiate yourself from the competitors. Now, you don't offer just low prices. You offer low prices and good service. Right? You start talking about ands rather than ors. The second big advantage is that we know that one thing about the environment is that it always changes. Right? What customers want changes. Regulations change. Technology changes. So the good job strategy companies, because continuous improvement is in their DNA, because they are changing all the time, when changes come, they are a lot faster to adapt to those changes than their competitors. So if and when automation comes into these industries, these companies are going to be the ones that will be able to leverage, take advantage of these technologies, and adapt them so much better than their competitors do. So I hope that most of you in this room will end up joining me in spreading the good job strategy. From my side, what I focus, you could have an impact through various ways, right? At a minimum, everybody's a customer, so you can vote with your wallets. You can shop at stores or dine at restaurants or go to hotels that treat their workers much better. And you will know them because they'll give you much better service. Those of you who work in worker groups or policymakers, I imagine very few of you, obviously you have a role to play. But many of you probably play in these fields, right? Either as investors of these companies, thought leaders, educators, or executives. And these are the places where my research focused on as well. For the investors, with one of my students here at MIT Sloan, we developed this good job score that rates supermarkets on how well they follow the good job strategy, and it's available. And then I'll really quickly give you an example of a couple of companies. So one of the things that I've been working on is to see more examples of the good job strategy outside retail. Because my research has focused on retail, the 4 choices are not specific to retail. But I know that, and research suggests that's true. But now I'm trying to show the applicability. So I'm working on a couple examples of that, but I'll share with you one of them. So Quest Diagnostics. How many of you know about Quest Diagnostics? So they take all the blood work, either from their patient services or from hospitals, other places. They transport them into their labs, and then they analyze them, and then they provide the patients with the data that they have. So Quest Diagnostics, a couple of years ago, and they have call centers that talk with patients, and call centers that also are in touch with the clients in hospitals, in small clinics, et cetera. So a couple of years ago, they decided to consolidate their call centers. They used to have lots of regional call centers. This is, I imagine many of you might have gone through this experience in your organizations. They consolidated into 2. And then there was chaos. High employee turnover, the vicious cycle that I showed you in retail was happening there. The chaotic situation where managers have no time to manage, but they're just firefighting was happening there because their absenteeism was about 13%, their employee turnover was so high, and their customer satisfaction was incredibly low. And then they got a hold of the book, and they decided, we're going to do this in our organization. And I'm going to show you the outcome, not necessarily exactly what they did. We wrote a case about it and taught it in our MBA curriculum last semester. But I'll show you the outcome that they have after implementing the good job strategy. So within 18 months, this was the effect on their customers. They had a lot fewer complaints, fewer lost accounts. They were actually losing a lot of accounts. Their transfer rate, so if a call center rep cannot answer the call well, they have to transfer it to somebody else, which is, of course, waste the patient's or the customer's time. Their transfer rate went from 12% to 9.5%, and calls answered within 60 seconds went from 50 to 70%. Effect on employees, turnover went down from 34% to 16%. Their absenteeism went from 12.4% to 4.2%. Higher pay for reps. One of the first things that they did was to increase pay for the reps. And initially, when they started on this journey, 80% of their training costs were going for onboarding because turnover was so high. And in this industry, you need a lot of training. And it went from 80% to 42%. And overall, even though they increased pay, $2 million in savings, because they also did offer less. And they found about smart ways to reduce call volume and to make their reps a lot more productive. $1.2 million from improvement projects. From July 2006 to February 2017, so they started empowering, they standardized processes and empowered their workers. They had 1,556 ideas that came from 600 reps. And 1,001 of them were completed. So the power of being able to empower your frontline, those who are closest to work oftentimes know exactly what to improve and being able to work on that. So I give this example, and I'm so proud of this because Quest is also an Algeo sponsor. I know at least one Algeo. Do we have other Algeos here? And now, when I talked to them, I said, why don't you do your Algeo project around this? So now the next Algeo project is starting right now, is applying the good job strategy in their night labs, where they, again, have high turnover. And once they do it in their labs, their objective is to do it in their patient services. So this is the type of impact that we at MIT can make through making a difference in the lives of people. And I'm going to end with this quote from Patti Donovan, who is one of my favorite retail workers. And we have just a couple of minutes for questions afterwards. So Patti works for Kwik Trip. Her tasks are, processing people at the checkout, shelving merchandise, cleaning toilets, cleaning gas pumps. But when I talked to Patti and when I talked to so many of the people who worked at Kwik Trip, they didn't see their job that way. Like they were always very happy and they felt pride working for this company. And I said, why are you always so happy? What you do doesn't sound that glamorous. Like, why? What gets you? And she said, I work with 12 or 14 people, and every day they go out and they touch 12 or 14 people. So I get to make a really big difference in so many people's lives by trying to get them to see what Kwik Trip's ending goal is, and that's for everybody to be happy and everybody to be successful. If we can create jobs like that at a convenience store chain with gas stations, with amazingly high profits and great customer service and low prices, we could create them anywhere. And it's really up to all of us to make that happen. So thank you. Yes?
A lot of these companies are already in profitable niches. And really the question is, can you go into any field and get these kinds of improvements with a good job strategy? In other words, to what extent is it the fact that you're in a growth industry? What's really behind this?
It's interesting because I could argue that retail is no longer really a growth industry, right? I think in the future we will see fewer retail stores than we do now. And there's a lot more interest about the good job strategy now than there was a couple of years ago. And I think it's because as your industry is, came to a point where it's not growing anymore, only the excellent companies will end up surviving, right? Only those that offer real reasons for customers to shop at their places are going to be the ones that will survive. And I think in those types of industries, more companies will move into this strategy. Yes?
Related question. So most of the industry you talked about is industries that will have automation taking over to a large extent. That actually came up in an earlier session today. So those jobs will disappear because they will be automated. So in a certain sense, those people, although they might have a good job right now with this strategy, they might have no jobs, maybe say in 10 years from now, because the industry simply don't exist anymore.
That's a great question. It's interesting because for every academic that says automation will kill jobs, there's another one that argues that's not going to be the case. But I'm not going to take any one of those arguments. But I would say, let's say that retail employment shrinks by 1 million, by 2 million, over the next few years. What's going to happen to these companies, right? What's going to happen to the people? So if those companies are growing in different ways, they'll find ways to create value for their employees. I'll give you an example from Maradona. So Maradona, several years ago, decided that they have this philosophy. They say, we try not to ask a man to do what a machine can do. Because we want our employees to use not just their hands, but their heads and their hearts in creating great value to the customers. So they realized that the distribution work was people were just using their hands. And they automated that. They did not lay off a single person. They trained them so that they could operate those machines. And they found jobs for them elsewhere. And if you ask other retailers, they will say, we would love for the checkout process to be automated. Because then our people don't have to do the checkout process. They could actually take care of the customers, right? Kwik Trip CEO, when he was in here, this same question came to him. His first answer was, he doesn't believe those jobs are going to go away because there's the Amazon example that everybody gives. That store is incredibly expensive and very difficult to operate. But that's another issue. But he said that we see robots as complement to people, not as a substitute for people. And we will take advantage of those complementarities. And the last thing that I will say is that automation won't come into these spaces and robots won't come in and say, hi, I'm here, and now you get out. There will be a process for implementing these technologies. And it's going to be the good jobs companies, because they are great in improvement and involving their workers, they're going to be the ones that are able to adapt to these so much better. Now, in the future, if there are fewer jobs, then there are people. That's the economist's problem that I'm going to let them address that. Yes?
So a lot of cities have been putting a $15 minimum wage on the ballot, and I know you said it's a lot more than priority.
Yep.
But in general, do you think that's a good idea for a local economy, or is it a bad idea? Does it cause lots of jobs? What have you observed?
Look, I will say, so I'm not an economist, but the $7.25 is a ridiculous minimum wage, right? I think we can all agree with that. If there's a minimum wage, that wage has to take care of people. I see minimum wage hikes as a constraint that companies would have that would encourage them to find ways to increase the labor productivity and increase contribution of their workers. So I would, as a citizen, I would vote yes for the minimum wage hike. And I would hope that that would actually encourage more companies to adapt these strategies. Yes, and then I will move on to this.
I wanted to ask more about the theory you were talking about, operating with Slack, and you talked about inventory management. So could you just explain a little bit more about what that means?
And I wonder who I can cold call. So let's say that we have, and this is from inventory management, we always had this normal curve, right? Let's say that this is the forecasted demand, but then there's some variability, right? Some standard deviation to the left and to the right. So when you have demand that has a distribution, how much stock do you have, right, for each product? Now let's put that into staffing. So let's say that I have an operating environment, and on average I have the expected workload is 100 hours of work, right? But then some days it might be more than 100 hours of work. Some days it might be less than 100 hours of work, right? And let's assume that its workload is distributed normally. Now, if you were looking at this, where would you staff your store? Would you staff it with 100 hours of work or more or less?
We would do more we would staff more to cover for unexpected absences and for, unexpected absences and say an extra truck comes that day.
Okay, so you're saying you would operate here?
Yeah, we usually do.
Anyone who thinks differently?
It depends on your cost of overage and underage.
You see, my former students are shining now. Yes, please, say more.
So if your cost of not having an hour available, but there is the work to do it, is incredibly high, you want to have extra labor to deal with it. But let's say the cost of having extra labor sit idle is very high, and in that case, it would be the exact opposite, where you would actually go under the 100 hours. So it really just depends on the relative cost of having excess or not enough labor.
Exactly. So in your environment, cost of underage might be a lot more expensive, right? In a lot of environments, cost of underage is very expensive, right? But here's the thing. So there's a cost of underage, there's a cost of overage. You can make mistakes either way. Now, you want to make the mistakes that less costly more often, right? So now let's think about it. In a setting like retail, what's the cost of underage? Lost sales. Lost long-term value of the client, data inaccuracy that might not lead to lost sales now, but that might lead to lost sales in the future, things that might happen now to lower sales or in the future. How easy is it to quantify this? Not super easy, right? So that's the cost of underage. What's the cost of overage? You mentioned it.
The hourly wage you're paying for an idle worker.
How easy is it to quantify?
Very easy.
Does it have an impact on your bottom line right away? So if you are a company and you are looking at this easy to quantify short term now versus difficult to quantify long term, which one do you think wins in most organizations? Especially if your mindset is that labor is a cost, right? But in companies like Maradona and Kwik Trip, their cost of underage is so much higher than cost of overage. Because cost of underage means not only bad customer service, and they have customer first. Remember, it's like customer first is their first value. Bad operations, but it also has an impact on their people. Now, because their employees are cross-trained, their cost of underage is actually, their cost of overage is not so high because they can shift labor to different tasks, right? And because they invest in their labor so much, and they pay their employees well, if they are in an environment where there are just too many people, they go around and they say, who wants to take time off? And there are so many people who want to take time off. But you see how this operating with Slack work with other choices, right? It works with investment in people. It works with cross-training. It works with improvement, empowerment, because when you have extra people, they have time. They can work on improvement. So it's a system that works really nicely together. Should we take a few more and then? Yes. And he's my former student too.
Yeah.
So.
What are your thoughts? I'm sure you've explored this on how the good job strategy folds into the on-demand economy and the 1099 model with its limitations.
Yeah. So one of the companies here that I have here is called Managed by Q, and my students who have been away for 5 years, of course, don't know about this company. Didn't exist then, but they have cleaners, on-demand cleaners, and they started with 1099ers, and they realized that when you have contractors who you can't train, who you can't do performance management as well as you could inside the company, they don't deliver great service to the customer. And there are some environments where the point is getting somebody from point A to point B, which is a very simple task. But in more complicated tasks, it makes a lot of sense for them to actually invest in their workers and to create a system like that. So they're one of the examples of those types of settings where they went from 1099 to W-2, so they went from contractors to their own employees. But exactly how you would do it with contractors, I don't really know, because some of the mechanisms are not really under your control as much. But some of them, I'm sure, would be applicable. Simplifying operations is certainly applicable, right? Operational simplification. Empowering people to make decisions, applicable. When I talk to Lyft drivers, they say that there's a mechanism they can actually encourage ideas to the headquarters. So if you were to, I'm not an expert in these settings, but if you were to look at those 4 choices, you probably can find applications into those choices. But I think the type of consistency that you see when you manage your own workforce is hard probably to see with contractors.
You mentioned about importance of performance management.
Yes.
In terms of performance management, recently I'm starting to hear, including Harvard Business Review article, the companies are starting to move away from performance evaluations. So it seems to me it's a little bit contradicting. And by the way, my company is also moving away from the performance management evaluation perspective.
Absolutely, but you're talking about yearly performance evaluation. What I'm talking about, daily performance evaluation. I'll give you an example. If you work at Costco, they offer less, right? So they have fewer products than other retailers. Every day, the store manager will walk through the store, and they will talk to the person who's in charge of that section. Why did you shelve, which products sold more than others? Why did you shelve this here versus there? Like, what do you think we could do to improve sales? This is a form of performance management and coaching, right? Everyday feedback. Again, standardization enables you to provide that everyday feedback. At Kwik Trip, they have this list of items that need to be done, and everybody needs to put their initials next to the task that they finished. And that is a way of performance management, because then if that task is not done well, immediately the manager or coworker can say, hey, you're the one who cleaned the bathroom, but it doesn't look so great. Like, this is how you do it. So I'm not talking about yearly performance evaluations. I'm talking about high expectations, high performance, and feedback every day. And that's what matters. And that's very consistent with what people are finding now. In those who focus on performance management literature, that's what they're finding as well. And these choices enable for that.
Industry that has very low margins, right? So in terms of EBIT, et cetera. And all the measures that we were talking about are, have short-term impact that are, not very nice, right? So the payments, the slack, you have benefits in the long term, but nothing in the short term. So how do you do it economically profitable in the transition? And if not possible, how do you convince executives to make it happen? Because you have the shareholders behind, looking for short-term impact, especially in retail. I mean, they are not looking for 2 years now, but next 3 months, right?
Yep. So I'll give you one example of how Quest did this, and I'll give you another example of what we're doing right now. Because Sarah and I, we started a nonprofit Good Jobs Institute. And part of what we do is to create tools and frameworks for companies to use. But the other is to work with companies to implement the good job strategy. Now we're working with a large retailer with over 1,000 stores. And we start our prototype store implementation next week. So I can talk a little bit about that as well. But what Quest did was, first of all, you don't implement all of these all at once. And you don't implement them everywhere. Like, the wrong thing to do is from the top to say, I'm going to simplify, I'm going to standardize and empower, this is how it's going to work, and let's implement it across the whole chain. That's very expensive, that's very long, and it doesn't involve people, and it just doesn't work. And that's how a lot of companies are doing it right now, by the way. But what I would do, and what Quest did, they said, we are going to experiment. It's going to be top vision, bottom-up execution. So one of the first things they said, what do employees complain most about? It was wages and career paths. So they said, OK, from the beginning, we're going to increase wages. And then they say, how do we pay for that? So they said, you know what? If we do increasing wages along with offer less, along with simplification, so people's workload is less, now we can do it in an economic way. right? So being smart about which choices you make and when to make, the sequence of choices is important. In terms of implementing the whole system, what works great is you study it in one small setting, right? And you do rapid prototyping, create your system, and then you expand from that. So the mistakes are small, and you don't make them. And as you learn more, you can start advertising. This is something that works. Now let's get everybody else to start doing it. So that's how, that's what we're doing it with this one retailer. We will see how that works out. I'm going to tell you, it's one thing to yep about you companies should do this, you executives should all do this, and then now putting, saying, okay, I'm going to put my name and we are going to help you, and if you can't do it, we will share the responsibility with you. So we will find out. So final question here.
Oh, thank you. So when you give a report card to a retailer, how do you model the huge variety of business intelligence, BI tools, and traffic counters, and the plethora of data meant to help the retailer, as well as metrics like return on visit and basket size? How do you model it and
one of the things that I have found is that even those retailers that have unbelievable amounts of data have very little insights when it comes to making sense of their data. One retailer we worked with last semester, traffic counters, cash register utilization, they have everything. Yet no one has looked to see, on average, how many hours does a typical worker work? And when we showed them that the median was, I think it was 12 hours per week, they said, wow. And I'm like, you have all these data, but you don't know. So you have to think about customer first and think about what are the metrics that matter most for customers and not be too detailed about some other ones. You have to think about productivity and quality metrics, right? And some sort of employee satisfaction metrics, turnover, the number of hours. But those have to come from your strategy. Then these are the available data, and as a result, we should focus on those. Because I feel like most of it is about availability of data rather than what matters most, and let's go out and let's create insights from that. Great, thank you very much.